Hey everyone, and a massive welcome to Beyond Earth, your portal to the past and future of humanity. Ever wondered what a caveman actually did all day? Forget the cartoons of guys in fur loincloths dragging women by the hair or constantly clubbing mammoths. The reality? So much more complex and honestly way more interesting. So, how did our ancestors spend their waking hours when just staying alive was a full-time job? When we talk about cavemen, we're usually picturing humans from the Paleolithic period. Now, get this era stretches from about 2.6 million years ago all the way up to around 12,000 years ago. That's over 99% of human history, folks. A time before farms, before cities, before anyone was writing anything down. But don't think for a second it was a boring, static time. Oh no. Huge leaps in technology, how they organized themselves, even art were happening all through the Paleolithic. How do we know all this? Well, archaeologists dig up amazing clues. Stone tools, ancient fireplaces, leftover food bits, and sometimes even fragile things like woven textiles or wooden tools. And those incredible cave paintings and little carved figures? They give us tiny windows into their symbolic world. We also learn a bit from studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, though we have to be super careful making direct comparisons across such mind-bogglingly long stretches of time. Now, here's a crucial point. The Paleolithic wasn't a one-size-fits-all experience. Life was massively different depending on where you were, what the climate was like, and even when in that vast period you lived. Imagine an early Homo habilis in Africa 2 million years ago. Their day would have been worlds apart from a Cro-Magnon artist painting bison in a French cave 20,000 years ago. Climate was probably the biggest game changer. During the Ice Ages, with giant glaciers covering huge chunks of Europe and Asia, survival tactics were totally different than in warmer times or places. Groups near coasts or rivers got good at fishing, while those in forests or grasslands hunted different animals and gathered different plants. But what ties all these Paleolithic people together? Their lifestyle. They were hunter-gatherers. They got their food by hunting animals and gathering wild plants. So are you ready? Let's rewind the clock and peek into the hours, days, and seasons of our ancient ancestors. So the Paleolithic day kicked off with the sunrise. No alarm clocks, no bright electric lights, just the natural ebb and flow of light and darkness, changing with the seasons. First order of business? Getting that fire going again from the embers of last night's blaze. Archaeologists have found sites like Terra Amata in France, dating back 380,000 years, with carefully kept hearths. These weren't just for a cozy vibe. They meant warmth, light, protection from predators, and of course cooked food. Can you imagine trying to start a fire from scratch every single day without matches or a lighter? That's why most groups kept embers glowing or slow-burning materials smoldering overnight. Mornings were prime time for tasks needing good daylight. The group would take stock. Food supplies looking a bit thin? Do those spear points need sharpening? Any signs of game nearby? And of course, a daily water run was essential, usually from streams or springs, carried in animal bladders, woven baskets, or eventually simple pottery. Instead of a rigid 9-to-5, Paleolithic life was a mix of getting what they needed right now and planning for the future. Evidence from a site in Israel called Gish Banat Yoakov, nearly 800,000 years old, shows an amazing understanding of when different plants would be ripe, suggesting some pretty sophisticated forward-thinking. The day's main hustle really depended on the season and what was immediately needed, but getting food was always top of the list. Often, adult men focused on hunting, especially the bigger animals, while women typically gathered plant foods and hunted smaller creatures. But hey, this wasn't set in stone. Archaeological evidence suggests gender roles were pretty flexible. What do you think that flexibility tells us about their societies? Midday might be for prepping food, fixing tools, or just taking a break if it was scorching hot. As the day wound down and hunters returned, hopefully with something, and gatherers brought back their haul of plants, everyone would gather around the fire. This evening time was probably for storytelling, making plans for the next day, and just connecting as a community. Now, let's talk more about that food quest because it was the primary job. Hunting big animals? That took serious skill and teamwork. Early on, humans were probably more like opportunistic scavengers snagging leftovers. But by 500,000 years ago, at sites like Boxgrove in England, we see clear signs of organized hunting. They found a horse shoulder blade there with a definite spear wound, proof they were hunting, not just finding already dead animals. Early Paleolithic hunters used pretty simple tools like hand axes and wooden spears. But fast forward to 400,000 years ago, and humans at Skaaningen in Germany were crafting these incredible wooden spears, perfectly balanced for throwing. Then, around 30,000 years ago, the spear thrower came along. Think of it as an extension of the arm that dramatically boosted range and power. And in some places, the bow and arrow popped up by 20,000 years ago. Pretty high-tech for their time, wouldn't you agree? But hunting wasn't always a sure thing. That's why gathering plants was the more reliable food source. We know Paleolithic people ate a huge variety of plants: tubers, fruits, nuts, seeds, and leafy greens. Scientists have even studied tiny bits of food trapped in the plaque on Paleolithic teeth. Dental calculus, fancy term. And found traces of all sorts of plants, including some used for medicine. Gathering all these plants meant having a deep knowledge of when they grew, where to find them, and how to prepare them. This was wisdom passed down through generations, a real sophisticated understanding of their environment. And don't forget fishing. The Paleolithic site at Coster in Illinois, from about 9,000 years ago, shows they were using nets and hooks made from bone. Seasons completely dictated their food rhythm. Spring, maybe bird eggs and fresh greens. Summer, berries and hunting younger animals. Autumn was nut season and time to prep for winter. Winter itself often meant relying more on stored foods and whatever hunting they could manage. Food storage tech was limited but vital. Some groups dried meat, and early jerky. Others dug underground pits to keep certain foods cool. And in colder regions, nature provided its own freezer. Their diet was remarkably diverse, much more so than the early farming diets that came later. Looking at Paleolithic human bones, they generally show good nutrition, with fewer deficiencies than their farming descendants. Interesting, right? And a massive innovation. Cooking. We're still debating exactly when it started, but controlling fire for cooking goes back at least 400,000 years, maybe even earlier. Cooking was a game changer. It made many foods easier to digest, unlocked more calories, and even neutralized natural toxins in some plants. Paleolithic folks also spent a lot of time making and fixing their tools. It wasn't just an occasional hobby, it was constant. Stone tools get dull with use, so they needed regular resharpening or replacing. A skilled flint knapper could whip up a functional cutting edge in minutes, but more complex tools? That took hours of careful work. The evolution of their stone tool technology is fascinating. The earliest Oldowan tools were just simple stone cobbles with a few flakes knocked off to make a crude edge. Then, by 1.76 million years ago, you get Acheulean hand axes. These show much more careful shaping, often symmetrical. The Middle Paleolithic brought the levallois technique, giving them more control over the size and shape of the stone flakes they produced. And then the Upper Paleolithic, starting around 50,000 to 40,000 years ago, saw an explosion of specialized tools. Burins for engraving, scrapers for preparing animal hides, awls for punching holes, and sharp projectile points for hunting. These weren't just trial and error. They show a deep understanding of how stone works and what the tool needed to do. And tools weren't just stone. Wood was probably the most common material, but it rarely survives for us to find. But we have some amazing exceptions, like those wooden spears from Skaaningen, or a yew-wood spear tip from Clacton-on-Sea in England. They show incredible craftsmanship, really considering the wood's natural properties. Bone, antler, and ivory became super important in the Upper Paleolithic. They could be carved into fish hooks, needles, yes, for sewing, harpoons, and even decorative items. Antler was especially prized because it's both strong and a bit flexible. For processing food, they had grinding stones for seeds, pounding tools for tough plant bits, and specialized cutting tools for butchering. Experiments have shown that stone tools could efficiently butcher even massive animals like elephants, though it must have been a long, hard job. Containers were also essential. Early on, they probably used natural stuff like gourds, shells, or animal bladders. By the Upper Paleolithic, we see evidence of woven baskets and sewn hide bags. And the earliest pottery? That shows up around 20,000 years ago in China. As for clothing, especially in colder times, preparing hides was key. Stone scrapers cleaned the fat and tissue off, and those bone needles allowed them to sew hides together. So, where did these cavemen actually live? Well, despite the name, caves were just one option among many. Sure, natural shelters like caves and rock overhangs were used, especially in places with harsh weather. Famous cave sites like Lascaux or Altamira in Europe show signs of extensive use. But think about it, how many perfect, habitable caves are actually out there? Probably not that many. Evidence suggests they were often used seasonally, not year-round. The archaeological record shows all sorts of constructed shelters. At Terra Amata in France, they found traces of oval huts, about 8 to 15 meters long, built with wooden posts. In Mazyrik, Ukraine, about 15,000 years ago, people arranged mammoth bones in circular patterns to create foundations for dwellings, likely covered with animal hides. Imagine living in a house made of mammoth bones. Inside these shelters, space was often organized. Hearths were usually central, with sleeping areas, tool-making spots, and food processing zones around them. And keeping a home, even a Paleolithic one, required work. The fire needed tending, shelters needed mending after storms, and living areas needed a good clear-out now and then. Some sites even have distinct dumping areas where trash was put, away from where they lived. Child rearing was just part of daily life. Unlike today where kids are often in separate schools or activities, Paleolithic children likely watched and joined in with adult tasks from a very young age. How else would they learn all those essential skills? Personal hygiene is harder to spot archaeologically, but studies of modern hunter-gatherers suggest they had regular practices, like cleaning teeth with fibrous plants and bathing when water was available. And home life also meant caring for the sick or injured. Several Paleolithic skeletons show evidence of healed serious injuries or long-term disabilities. What does that tell us? It suggests strong community support for those who couldn't fully contribute to getting food. Contrary to the primitive stereotype, Paleolithic social life was rich and complex. The basic social unit was the band. Typically 20 to 30 people, usually a few related families. But these bands weren't totally isolated. We find materials like special types of stone or shells hundreds of miles from where they originated, indicating trade networks. Social bonds were kept strong through various activities. Sharing food was fundamental, creating a system of give and take. At sites like Dolny Vestinus, dating back 29,000 years, they found huge hearths capable of cooking enough food for big gatherings, suggesting communal feasts. Can you imagine the parties? Art played a massive role. Some of the earliest clear human art includes processed ochre, a natural pigment, at Blombos Cave in South Africa, almost 100,000 years ago. By the Upper Paleolithic, we see those spectacular cave paintings, portable figurines, and even musical instruments. Music is tricky because it disappears, but we've found bone flutes in Germany dating back 43,000 years. Reconstructions show they could produce notes in recognizable scales. Paired with drums made from stretched hides or hollowed logs, which rarely survive, it suggests some pretty sophisticated musical traditions. As for medicine, we've found plant residues with medicinal properties in that dental calculus I mentioned. And some of those strange human-animal hybrid figures in cave art? They might hint at shamanic practices, perhaps depicting altered states of consciousness. What about conflict? It existed, sure, but it wasn't constant warfare. While some Paleolithic skeletons show injuries from violence, they're relatively rare compared to later periods. Having plenty of resources compared to the population size probably helped reduce competition in many areas. Overall, the Paleolithic lifestyle was the longest and most successful human adaptation. It sustained our species through dramatic climate changes and allowed us to spread across the entire globe. So, what can we learn from this incredibly long and enduring way of life? First, Paleolithic humans were remarkably skilled at managing their environment. They weren't just passive victims. They actively shaped landscapes through selective hunting, managing plant growth, and even controlled burning. There's evidence from Australia of Aboriginal fire management going back 65,000 years, creating mosaic landscapes that actually boosted biodiversity. Second, their lifestyle demanded an extraordinary breadth of knowledge. Each person needed a working understanding of hundreds of plant and animal species, where to find good stone for tools, weather patterns, how to make tools, and complex social dynamics. This generalist knowledge is a stark contrast to our modern world of super-specialization, isn't it? Third, their technologies, while appearing simple to us, were sophisticated solutions to their environmental challenges, developed through generations of trial, error, and refinement. The basic principles behind many modern tools were actually established way back then. And perhaps most significantly, the Paleolithic period saw the birth of symbolic expression, abstract thinking, and the cultural complexity that truly defines us as human. This wasn't some primitive prelude to real civilization. It was a highly successful and sustainable way of life. For over 99% of human history, this lifestyle kept human populations in balance with their resources and supported rich cultural traditions. That's definitely worth thinking about as we face our own environmental challenges today. So, to answer our big question, what did cavemen actually do all day? They engaged in a complex dance between meeting immediate needs and planning for the long term. They manufactured and maintained essential technologies. They acquired, processed, and shared food. They built and repaired their homes. They taught their children practical skills and cultural knowledge. They created art, music, and symbolic systems. They nurtured social bonds within their groups and with others. They adapted to ever-changing environmental challenges with incredible innovation and mobility. When we look at the archaeological record with fresh eyes, we don't see primitive brutes. We see innovative, resilient humans tackling life's challenges with creativity and grit. Their solutions, from clever hunting tools to breathtaking art, laid the very foundations for everything that came after. So the next time you picture a caveman, try to see beyond the fur loincloth. Imagine a skilled technologist, a knowledgeable botanist, an innovative artist, and a cooperative community member, all rolled into one remarkably adaptable human being. Absolutely fascinating, isn't it? What part of their daily life surprised you the most? Or what do you find most impressive? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved journeying back in time with us today on Beyond Earth, please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. We've got so much more to explore together. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.